very easy.
That one's just for the slideshow.
Yeah, and then it will bring us to the YouTube, and you can monitor. I used to. So this one is telling us we're being live streamed. Okay, sorry, I'm just we just started a live stream, so yeah.
I picked a good time. Right.
Look at this. After they go live, we can go into here and like monitor and chat. There's two people in there. One of them is probably me. And after we go live, we usually start posting on Facebook. So, we're about ready to get started. We are live.
Yeah, I want to enable it just a bit so that people can enable it. Yeah. Are you just using Stripe?
Okay. Hello, everybody. I think we've just established that our wonderful volunteer Jen is stronger than I am, as she was able to move this microphone stand to fit my mouth. Woo! I'm Dorianne Emerton. Thank you very much for being here today at Brockton Writer Series. As usual, we're going to start with the land acknowledgement. I have to do this from my phone now. Like I used to print the script out at my office before I came. And then I got a new job where it's like very strict. You don't do personal things on the job. And now I'm like, okay, I'll read from my phone. I can do that. It's 2023. So we wish to acknowledge that Brockton organizers do our work on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat nations, and most recently the Mississaugas of the New Credit. We acknowledge the ways that colonialism, genocide have impacted the Indigenous peoples, and that settlers have a responsibility for making spaces at events like this for Indigenous voices, and that we all share the responsibility to critically understand and challenge the forces of systemic oppression. And so for many of us, this includes recognition of how our ancestors as settlers have contributed to these colonial legacies with both silences and actions. It means writing to your elected officials. It means shouting on social media, if that's something you like to do, and if you don't like to do that, fair enough. It means holding our government accountable for reporting back on truth and reconciliation. It means following Indigenous journalists and learning from them. It means holding the child welfare system accountable. There's a lot of different, I'm all about land back, right? I'm all about like, why do we even have Crown land? That's not Crown land. We could start there and move on. We'd also like to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to center the voices of Black and Indigenous people, other people of color, and other people from underrepresented groups, such as disabled people, LGBTQIA people, and all of this is included in our mandate. And thank you very much for being with us tonight at Glad Day Bookshop. Thank you very much to those of us joining us on YouTube. Today's lineup will include a guest speaker, as always, and then readers. We have 3 readers for you tonight, so 1 less than usual, which is great since we started a little bit late. We should be able to end on time. please, if you are on YouTube, if questions occur to you for the Q&A, please type them into the chat box. The guest speaker will have her own Q&A after that speaking. And then for the readers, we get them all up and have like a group Q&A. So as you think of them, type them into the chat box. There's a delay. Then our wonderful tech person will have those questions for us. And with that, I would like to invite my co-host, Nancy, to the stage.
I printed my script out. So. Okay, Brockton Writer Series was founded in November 2009, which we've been active in the Toronto literary scene for over a decade. Our nimble Brockton volunteers are Jen Albert, Ellen Crawley, who's not here today, Dorianne Emerton, Faye Dunn, and I'm Nancy K. Clark. If you're interested in joining this amazing team and getting some volunteer experience, check in with us after the readings. We'd love to hear from you and could really use your help. We would like to acknowledge with deep thanks the continued support of the Ontario Arts Council, who makes this series possible. Finally, our sincere thanks to you, our audience, for being here with us tonight, and also the audience online. Now on to Brockton's guest speaker. Alex Caffarelli is a genderqueer femme Jewish witch based in Toronto. Their spoken word has been featured across North America on themes of queer sexuality, survivorship, chronic illness, ritual, and activism. Alex facilitates creative writing workshops and is currently an MFA candidate in creative writing at the University of Guelph. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, everyone. And is this the YouTube people? Oh, yeah, it's right there. Cool. Hi, everyone. So I'm Alex, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a method of pedagogy that I use and that I've been working with for many years. It's called the Amherst Writers and Artists Method. Is anyone here familiar with it? Cool, yeah. So it was developed by Pat Schneider, and who passed away in 2020 at she's 86 years old. Amazing woman, did a lot of great work. So the method was developed actually it started in '79. She started teaching writing workshops in Massachusetts, and with the support of participants at her workshops and other facilitators, she came up with this method over many years. She was inspired by some of you might have heard of Peter Elbow, who wrote Writing Without Teachers in 1973. And this method is rooted in the writing process movement, whose pioneers have called for and have brought about reform in teaching writing since the 1930s. And the 1930s is also when the Iowa workshop method started. So it's interesting because they seem very different. So I wonder if that's kind of what it was rejecting. The Iowa, there's some similarities, but the Iowa, and the workshop method, for folks who might not be familiar with that, is basically when you're a writer and you're looking for feedback, which is really important as a writer. There's, in like universities and other contexts as well, workshops, the writer will, with the Iowa workshop method, the writer will, from what I understand, I haven't actually done that one, the writer will share their writing with people to read ahead of time, and then the readers will, mark up their comments on the writing, and then the writer has to have like a gag. They call it. They can't talk. They don't actually have a gag, but that make it more interesting. No, they're not allowed to say anything or to respond to anything, and the readers just give them feedback, and it seems like it's heavy on the critique, and yeah, the writer doesn't get to respond or say anything about like who they're writing for, where they're coming from, what they're trying to achieve. And so this is actually, there's been a number of teachers and facilitators who have pushed against that, like more recently Matthew Salesi's with his book, The Craft in the Real World. And this book here, I'm going to talk about a little bit, because actually this is something I've been adding to my pedagogy, the Anti-Racist Writing Workshop, How to Decolonize the Creative Classroom by Felicia Rose Chavez. These are more recent, and then this is Pat Schneider's book. So this came out in, it was 2004, actually, I know she started training other writers to become workshop leaders in 2004. This came out shortly before that. So I'm going to talk about the writing with others part today. So, and this is, so I'm actually a very collaborative artist. my background's in performance and music. I've been writing my whole life, and I would say I've started really I've really been serious about my writing my whole life. I wrote fiction when I was in 5th grade and asked my teachers if I could read it to all 80 students. And they agreed. So I heard about the runaways, these kids that were always getting into trouble at school. This was before I was getting into trouble at school. And then, and then years later, I became, when I graduated high school, I started, I was in a punk rock band and I was writing songs for that. And then I was in a performance group called the Psychic Sluts and writing songs for that. And then I started shifting into writing erotica and and reading, touring that. And then when I applied for the program at the University of Guelph, I needed to pick a genre. And so I realized I felt like creative nonfiction was sort of, because I write from truth. And that is what these workshops have really encouraged me to do. But it's funny because I joined the program planning to write a memoir, and now I'm obsessed with writing fiction. And I'm actually, I'm doing that thing where I'm kind of starting from truth, which I'm realizing probably all fiction writers do. And then, embellishing and finding my way kind of far away from truth sometimes, but there's still truth in it, farther away from my truth. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm actually here to talk about writing in community and ways to generate creativity, which these are things that this method have really nurtured in me and others. So a little bit about Pat Schneider. So she had a really strong, her belief was that everyone who writes is a writer. Everyone is a writer, everyone is an artist. She was really invested in creating a non-hierarchical space as much as possible, given that we are all coming from different backgrounds and levels of privilege and marginalization. But she created this structure that holds space for everyone to be kind of writing on the same terms. And this kind of method really helped me get to a place where I was able to apply for an MFA program and be open to what I'd heard was going to be this Iowa workshop method thing. I kind of heard about this. It ends up, it is a very supportive program. I highly recommend it if anyone wants to talk to me about it. But so a little bit about the Amherst Writers and Artists method and Pat's vision for it, along with the people she worked with. There are 5 essential affirmations that go with the method. And I will write this for the blog in a week, so you'll be able to access that, and also with contact information for me. So everyone has a strong, unique voice. So there's a lot of support in the prompts to bring that voice out. Everyone is born with creative genius. Writing as an art form belongs to all people, regardless of economic class or educational level, because we can all learn from each other. And I actually find that in academia, sometimes it's harder to access that raw creativity. Because there's the pressure of deadlines, or even I haven't published a book yet, but I'm assuming that's true when you're having to meet a deadline for publishing too. You can get really stuck, and there's a lot of this method can kind of help move past that. 4 is the teaching of craft can be done without damage to a writer's original voice or artistic self-esteem, and this is true for everyone. And it's really important when working with people, again, who have different, are coming from different backgrounds and different experiences of marginalization and oppression, and to just honor that we all have stories, and these stories are equally important. And in fact, it's especially important for people who are marginalized to be having space to tell their stories and our stories. And 5 is a writer is someone who writes. So anyone can lead workshops in this method. It's everything you need to know is in this book. There is a 30-hour, 5-day, I think that's still what it was, I think that's still what the process is for the training for certification. But yeah, it's a 30-hour intensive training. I started taking AWA workshops in 2005 with Jen Cross in San Francisco when I lived there. And then I started facilitating in 2009 and became certified in 2014. It was the first certification that took place in Ontario, and it was shortly after I moved here, which worked out. And I've been doing them since then, although I've taken a few years off to actually focus on my own writing. But I do plan to get back to them as soon as I have the time and space to, commit to it. But I definitely sign up for my email list if you're interested. I mostly teach or facilitate workshops for queer and trans folks called Unicorn Medicine. So writing with others, I mean, there's probably reasons we all know already why it's nice to write with others. Like I've never really been able to subscribe to the idea that writing is solo. And I hear more and more that writers recognize that that's not true. But there is this kind of idea that writing is that you're alone in a cottage somewhere, which sounds great. But it's actually, you're always writing, we're in a world with each other. So we're writing from that lens. And we need feedback from each other and we need support from each other. And some of us maybe more than others. I need a lot of community to even get me to write at all and to hold me accountable to it and to give me some perspective on if what I'm writing is resonating or if it's if I'm getting across what I'm trying to. So and some other things that Pat mentions in her book is that writing with others can help you learn the craft, which is actually a very important element of this method, which some people, when I talk about this method, they're like, oh, it just sounds like a bunch of like woo-woo healing, which is also great, and that can be part of it, but it is about craft. And you learning the craft together can really help it sink in, and you can learn both from recognizing ways that craft is working and ways that it's not working in other people's writing and in your own. It can also help you correct your mistakes. Writing with others can help you take risks and network, eventually publish, believe in your own art, which is the first step for a lot of us, and a step we need to come back to again and again. It could also give you perspective, assist in physical and psychological healing. There is research out there that tells us this, which I'll post on the blog. And also it can complete the artistic act of, when you share art, when you create art, it's generally for someone to experience it, to receive it, to respond to it. I think I'm going to skip over some of the healing stuff, but I will say AWA workshops can be healing, but they are not specifically therapy. So, I'll say a little bit. So there's emotional and psychological healing through storytelling, because sharing experiences in a creative, supportive context with clear boundaries is an important element in healing. For example, during the aftermath of a traumatic event or even a long ago traumatic event, I've done a number of workshops for trauma survivors. The healing part is authentic expression, self-regulation. There's even research that physical healing can, as I mentioned, can result from writing in community. And validation, offering feedback on what is strong about others' expressive writing, allows participants to bear witness and validate shared realities. So the two things I came up here to talk about are generating creativity and writing in community. And building community. So I'm going to get now to what the actual method is. So basically the way it's set up is, first when I run a workshop, I do introductions, we go around, names. I always do pronouns and access needs for everyone, and that's like whatever, if you need people to speak up, if you can't hear them very well, if you need to do workshops on Zoom because it's not safe for you to do them in person or you need them to be hybrid, you do that before a workshop, but things like that. Just what do you need to feel like you can participate as much as possible, whether you're disabled or not. And then we talk about, set up ground rules. So the ground rules that I'll go with, these are the ground rules that are part of the 5 essential practices in Pat Shiner's book. And I've kind of changed how they're written, but there's confidentiality. So whatever's written, and I think this is often true in writing workshops, or at least they have been in the ones I've been at, whatever's shared stays in the space. Because another thing about this method is that we write together, we write to prompts, and then we share right after we've written a fresh piece of writing. So it's not been revised at all. So we, keep that space confidential. And also I mentioned the non-hierarchical spirit of the space. So I am the facilitator, I am the leader, I'm holding the space, if something, if it feels, if there's, I'm kind of managing the space, but I'm also writing with the writers. So I'm writing and I'm sharing. So that's a way that we're kind of all on the same playing field. And one thing that I find is really valuable in this practice is that we talk about all of the writing as fiction. So the reason for that is it's one of the ways that we kind of protect the writers. So whether you're writing as fiction or not, the readers, the listeners respond to it as fiction. A lot of times people are writing from truth, perhaps, but this was a place where I was kind of felt the freedom to embellish and start to feel my way into fiction. This is a boundary that when, kind of protects people if you want to write maybe a little more vulnerable. If we're talking about it in third person, the narrator, the characters, just talking about like that, it does create a bit of distance. That has been, I've noticed it in my workshops. It's really, really incredible the way it has helped me to be able to share stuff. It takes a little getting used to sometimes when someone's using first person to say, instead of saying you have this experience, to start saying, the narrator. But it does offer this layer of protection. Another thing is that we talk about, we focus on craft. So we try to stay away from, these stories remind me of being on a roller coaster in Spain or whatever, like, that's, I remember when you did that or whatever. We want to stay on, that's, the sensual language you used in this part was really moving, or, helped me really visualize that experience. The rhythm was, I really like the rhythm in this part, or this phrase stood out for me. So we don't say what we like or don't like, we talk about what's strong for us. And because it is fresh writing, we only, and this is just for these particular workshops, the AWA method also includes working on manuscripts. And so once you've revised, then we do more critical feedback. So we do both what's strong for us and also what we didn't understand, what pulled us out, things like that. So, that there is that. But when it's fresh writing, we just talk about what's strong with us, what's strong for us, and what stays with us, and any of those other things. There's actually, I'll leave this this book. It says the resource manual for writing group leaders that the certified members get. And there's a list of feedback that we can give, like strong, clear, or unusual images, strikingly precise language. It kind of helps when you're newer to this, or even if you've had experience, to be like, what was that? Or what is personification? And then we can talk about it. So let's see, where am I at for time? I can go on about this. So actually, do people want to do a quick write together? Yeah, okay. Because I know part of this is about building community. So we don't have much time. So it's just going to be like a couple minutes. So I know I didn't ask people to bring things to write on, but even if you have a phone, and I encourage everyone here and those of you watching from home to do this with us. So another thing that protects this space is timing it. So I'm going to keep an eye on time. And another thing is to not share what the prompts are going to be ahead of time. So I didn't share that with you. I'm going to tell you now. I'm the only one who knows what the prompts are when I come into the workshop. That's another way that helps us land right into that creativity, having a very short amount of time to write and not knowing what the prompt is. So is everyone ready?
Yeah.
I know, does anyone have paper?
I can't remember.
I should have, I wasn't sure if we would do this, but I have some backs of pages. Oh, so they don't come out with this. Anyone else need paper?
Yeah.
Raise your hand. And facilitators, don't worry, it's won't take.
Go for it.
And I'm going to write with everyone, so I said I'll have paper right here. So is everyone ready? Okay, so this is the prompt. We're going to take, I think we're just going to take 2 minutes. Write to a body part. It can either be your body or somebody else's. It could be a real body you have experience with or an imaginary body. So let's take 2 minutes for that. Try not to think about it, because this is all about free writing, which I didn't mention. Keep your pen moving, keep your fingers tapping, write for 2 minutes. Find a place to land for now. If you're writing with us online, find a place to land. Is that, oh yeah. Okay, turn it off. Oh.
Like,
Is that someone calling?
Oh, that's a phone call. Yeah.
It's now. Sorry about that. So the next thing we would do in a workshop is invite, if anyone wants to read, and maybe come up here so people can hear you, but no pressure. This is very fresh reading, and there's some writers in here that probably don't want to share it. But just as an example, what we would do is have, if someone wants to read, then we will offer feedback about what's strong and what stays with us. Does anyone want to? Great, come on up. Yay, brave person. What's your name?
Jules.
Jules is here to read.
shorter than you. Dear Nee, I'm sorry I banged you on Monday. I didn't know I couldn't do that anymore. I was so into dancing at this clown class that I didn't notice I hit you hard until the early dawn the next day when you screamed at me incessantly. And then I didn't take you seriously until you bloomed a dark wine red bruise. I promise to take better care of you from now on, but only if you promise me 40 more years of dancing. Sincerely, me.
Thanks, Jules. So what's strong about that piece? What stays with us? And if you say it from there, I'll repeat it in the microphone. Just, yeah.
I like the focus on the joy that the body part gives you to dance, and that sort of mutual respect and appreciation for that from the writer.
The joy that that body part gives the writer or the narrator from dance. You said it more eloquently.
And also
And you can
the
also
sense,
type it.
and also the sense that it's been taken for granted. And that she can't necessarily take it for granted. Yes, take care of it.
Yes, that it's taken for granted and she can't necessarily take it for granted. She has to take care of it. Anything else?
Was there something about clown? Yes. Yeah, so the fact that that was brought up, but then like otherwise not elaborated on was just kind of inherently funny, given that like the rest of the piece, like you know, it just, yeah, made me want to know more about the clown.
Yeah, there was like a clown or a clowning dance or something that was really intriguing. And I also really like the wine red bruise or something. Yeah, that stayed with me too. Yeah, that was great. Thank you. And thanks for the feedback, everyone. And I'm sure we could offer more. We had endless time. So then what we would do is we would go around and I would read as well. And people would give feedback just the same to me. And then we would move on to another prompt. And the next prompt that we're not going to do, but that I would do, and that you could do at home if you want, is write from the perspective of a body part. It could be the same body part or another one. And I'm sure somebody here can tell me what kind of, what craft we're focusing on here with those prompts. Character, that's one, yeah. There's another one too.
Personification.
Personification, that's good too. Wow, there's more than I realized.
Perspective?
Perspective, yeah, so also like POV. And more, I mean, and stuff comes up in the writing that, you know, like the sensory details and, you know, little clues that there's a clown involved. It's all kinds of tricks. So, and then, yeah, if the workshop continued to work together, we'll build more intimacy, more vulnerability. Sometimes there's someone who doesn't feel comfortable sharing, but who shares, you know, in the third week or something, or, and then it can move on to revisions, workshops and revisions, and then doing more critical feedback. And so, yeah, it's like an ongoing process, but this is where it starts and it can stay here for years and years. So yeah, I want to hear these other readers, so I'm going to wrap it up now. But if you are interested in more about it, you can look at the amherstwriters.org, I believe is the website. And you can look me up at alexcaparelli.com or alexcaparelli_Toronto on Instagram. But like I said, I will post on the blog, the Brockton Writers Series blog, in a week with a little more information. Please do reach out, because actually if people are interested in workshops, that might light a fire under my butt to get them going again. So thank you all so much. Oh, I forgot. I'm still okay. Okay, sorry. Just one time.
Do we, typically we like to use a second microphone and would have for that, but I can't make this thing go.
So maybe she can repeat the question.
Yeah, okay,
Sure.
right, we
Yeah.
repeat the question into that microphone. So do we have any questions? Yes.
I went online a while ago. So Pat Schneider writes, this is from Lisa, a lot about the power of writing from one's authentic voice. It just scrolled up. Here we go. How do you approach giving feedback to workshop participants whose authentic voice might be problematic?
How do you give feedback to workshop participants whose authentic voice might be problematic? Yes, that's a very good question. Yes, that is So there is another part of the, one of the elements, and I can't remember which of Pat Schneider's lists it's on, where you sometimes just have to break out of the method and handle things however you feel like they need to be handled. If it's, if somebody's being problematic in ways that are causing harm to other people, even with their voice, like, you can ask them to leave. You can also talk about it in the writing. So you can talk about like, oh, that voice, I noticed that there was like a real racist tone in that voice when it talked about, you know, whatever. I've seen this done in workshops, and it is, I mean, it's, you know, because this is a thing that, yeah, that's a great question. And I think that might be someone who also leads these workshops, so. Nice one, Lisa, if it is that person. But yeah, that's a very, and I did mean to bring that up. That is like, that can be real challenging. And another thing that I've needed when stuff comes up like that is I've needed to talk to other workshop leaders just to get support and ideas of how to handle these things.
We have a second microphone now. Oh, were you raising your hand?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to know where you got all get the prompts from.
Yeah, that's also a great question. So these books I brought, there's actually, I even have a few more in my bag that, well, you can get them online. You can look up writing prompts, but there's a lot of prompts in this book, Writing Alone and with Others, that are great, that I use frequently. There's all kinds of sensory prompts and, you know, sentence fragments and, you know, dialogue and all kinds of stuff. And then this anti-racist writing workshop book, there's some prompts in there that I've highlighted. And this Artist's Way, some people might be familiar with this, has some good prompts, but I've also just Googled, and also just walking around and like noticing something. And, you know, once you start thinking about prompts, everything becomes a prompt. But I could add that to the blog. I could maybe add some resources there. So that's a good question.
Excellent.
Mine's actually not a question, but I did want to plug, I'm starting loosely based on the Amherst method, a queer writing collective. So you all are invited, especially you, but we are having a writing session at Christy Pitts, 2 p.m. this Saturday. And if you want to know more, we're on Instagram at Queer Writing Collective.
Amazing. That's so cool. Queer Writing Collective on Instagram, meeting at Christy Pitts. Thanks for plugging that. It's great.
Outdoor writing. Love it.
Do it like yeah.
Any further questions? Okay, thank you so much, Alex.
Thank
That
you.
was great. I'm inspired to get back into group writing again now.
Yay.
Yeah. Is it me or is it me? Oh, yes. Alright. So now I have too many microphones. All right. Double fisting the microphones. So now that we are reaching the world with our very own YouTube series, we need your help to like boost it. So, you know, when I do this, I always like to try, I always unconsciously mimic the like gamer bros my kid watches on YouTube. And so then I just have to mention it because I don't want to sound like a dude bro. So like, I was like and subscribe. Yeah, like and subscribe. Before we had a YouTube channel, I was like, oh, that's so irritating. And now I'm like, oh, it is important though. It really helps us show up in searches. It really helps with the visibility. So if you could please like and subscribe to us on YouTube, like the video of this channel, go back and like them all. You can watch them all. There's some really great readers and presenters in our like past cache that we have since the Pandy made us get a YouTube channel. And if you're annoyed by the term Pandy, I do apologize. It's really annoying. Also, if you would like to give us money, that would be great. We will hand around a picture, but I know like less and less people carry cash these days. So we also have a PayPal. So here is the picture. if you want to put your money in there. And if not, if you would prefer to do it online, you can go to paypal.me/Brockton Writers. If you're able to spare a few dollars, all of it goes to the writers and making this great. And sometimes we get ASL interpreters, and which is also great for accessibility. And now for the readers. Again, for those of you watching online, please type your questions into the chat as they come to you, and our lovely Jen will get them together. And so first up, we have Zilla Jones, African Canadian from Treaty 1, which is Winnipeg, but here in person. We are so special and really, really happy that she's here. She's a 2023 Journey Prize winner. Well, that's good. Writers Trust Bronwyn Wallace Award finalist, and has won numerous short fiction awards, including the Malahat Review and Prism. Her debut novel, The World So Wide, and short story collection, So Much to Tell, will be published in 2025 and 2026, details of which will be on social media in October 2023. Zilla!
Hi, everybody. Good evening. So I'm going to read 3 really short excerpts from 3 different stories that cover themes that are common in my work that will be in the books that are forthcoming, that you'll hear more about in about a month. So the novel is set in Grenada, primarily in the Caribbean, during the 1979 to 1983 socialist coup and following US invasion. And so this story was in Bio magazine earlier this year, which is in Louisiana, of course. And it talks about an unnamed Caribbean island with a new government that's already facing some issues. And so it's told from the perspective of Desmond, who is a 16-year-old security guard. Desmond patrolled with Nate, who was 23 and talked constantly about women, what he was actually doing with them, and what he pretended to be doing with them. There was little difference between the two. So, Des, said Nate, hefting his gun onto his shoulder, when you coming down to the beach disco to see the nice girls? Desmond knew it was time he got interested in girls. He was 16 and he had a good job now, but Desmond didn't want to be like his father, Ralph. Nate, his partner, already had 2 children, and he complained often about their mothers, always with their hands out, Des, crying how poor they are. Desmond thought of Ma, how she would often serve him a meal with none for herself, claiming not to be hungry. How Desmond would hear the laughter and the clinking bottles from Ralph's dwelling at night, while Ma was trying to sleep before waking up before dawn to catch a taxi bus to work. Desmond wanted to commit to women and make a home together before they had children. Sensing Desmond's lack of interest in the topic, Nate switched tack. You hear what they say about Leader and the palace? Desmond perked up. No, what? Them saying Leader stole the money to build it from the people. But how could he do that? Desmond was horrified at this obvious lie. The palace belongs to the people. Them say he have Hummingbird House already, then he taking people's taxes to make this place. Nate glanced around and said, I ain't saying I agree, all right? You can't agree. We must support Leader. Desmond pulled all the authority he could into his voice. I know, Nate said quickly, too quickly. Desmond ran his eyes along Nate's body, his biceps puffing out his shirt sleeves, his dark face almost insolent beneath his camouflage cap. He wondered about Nate's security checks. Before Desmond could decide whether or not to say something else, there was a shout from outside the security perimeter, and Nate began running towards it. Desmond followed. They were met by 2 more security guards, Nash and Tom, who held a squirming figure between them, a thin, shoeless figure in a torn t-shirt. As Desmond grew closer, he realized that he recognized this figure, Ralph. We found this man coming through the fence, said Nash. Ralph found Desmond's eyes. I come to see my son, he whined, to look for work, to see if you all need builders. Him your father, Nash asked. Desmond noted the bars of Ralph's ribs visible through his shirt, the dusty leather of his bare feet. All his life, Ralph had been looking for work. Desmond felt shame on Ralph's behalf. At 16, Desmond had already gone further in life than his father ever would. Desmond remembered a comment Nate had made before. Him my father, but not my daddy. He addressed Ralph. We done the building, be too late, no work here. Desmond felt a growling, gnawing sensation in his belly. It felt like hunger, even though Desmond ate well at the palace. The feeling hardened as Desmond looked at Ralph. How you even know I'm here? He demanded. Ralph said, you and Bernice isn't at the old place no more. I asked. Well, I ain't want you here. Desmond pointed the muzzle of his weapon at Ralph. With it, he pointed all the lean years, all the empty plates. You go and don't come back. Nash and Tom began dragging Ralph towards the electronically controlled gate, and Desmond followed, the gun trained on his father. When Nash and Tom let go, Ralph ran down the road, churning up so much dust that he was soon invisible. Desmond felt plastic peeling off his heart, a lightning. All right, and then I have Prairie Fire, which is my hometown lit mag. And this was an issue from last year called Roots and Routes. And the story here, it's part of a collection of linked short stories that's going to be the published collection, hopefully. And it follows the life and times of Marie-Joseph Angelique, who was a real life slave woman in Montreal in 1734, accused of burning it down. And this is her story in her own words, told from different times in her life. So this is what freedom tastes like. She's praying to her God, like she does every morning and every night. It is no mystery what she prays about. The soul of Monsieur Francheval, her husband, dead almost a year now, and her own lack of offspring. No baby would dare enter a womb so shriveled with bitterness, and even her husband preferred to go to his grave rather than listen to her vile shrieking a day longer. But she bows her head and weeps onto her folded hands as if she is the one who has been wronged. When she's finished, she looks up and turns around to check that I'm standing beside her, wordlessly waiting as my duty demands. She blinks her tears upwards into her eyelashes, so pale that they disappear in the struggling sunlight, and her voice rasps, Angelique, vite, vite, I shall have the pork sausage and pickled cabbage for my supper, and you may have half a bowl of porridge. She decrees use water, not milk. I wondered what I could put in Madame's supper that she would not immediately recognize as poison. When I was a child, my mother told me about plants growing in our home in the kingdom of Jolov that can stop a man's heart. Young girls squeeze the juices of those plants into the palm wine of their older lovers, and when the lovers fall down dead, they are given a share of his livestock and his gold. But I am a slave in New France in the year of our Lord 1734, and nothing grows here in the short days of winter, where the sun is a silvered haze behind a screen of cloud, the grass is frosted white, and the windows are thick with flowerets of ice. I was the unwilling lover of Monsieur Francheval, and when his heart stopped of its own accord, there was nothing left to me, except more drudgery in a big manor house, acquired when Monsieur and Madame assumed, like most of Montrealais, that they would fill it with 15 children. But instead, there are only Madame, me, the laborer Claude Thibault, and the new domestic slave, 12-year-old Delphine, and we move around each other in a slow, silent dance of loathing and distrust. Like Madame, I have no children, even though I'm nearly 30, and in my case, this is by design. Children would bind my heart to this life of bondage. Madame persists in forcing me to lie with her neighbor's slaves to breed more free laborers for her. And I've had to use my mother's wiles to rid myself of each foul thing that has dared to invade my room, including the creatures Madame's own husband put there. My body remains my own, and I've kept my mind free too. I've only pretended to accept my status as chattel. I long to know the taste of freedom, to feel its sweet breeze unfettered on my tongue. And then we mentioned the Journey Prize. So this is an anthology you can buy. I'm not sure if it's here, but you can probably order it. Colin Stewart, it was from earlier this year. And this story, Lady, is about growing up with a mother who was colonized and talks about how you should be a lady. So this is a young girl named Rochelle and a young girl named Chastity in high school. I was fascinated by Rochelle from the moment I saw her beside her locker on the first day of grade 11. There were no other Black girls at West Acres High School. And unlike me, she was unapologetically and unquestioningly Black. I wore my color shamefully, doubtingly, shrugging it on like a robe each day, hoping no one would notice it. I crept through the school as an interloper, pretending that if I wore the same clothes and listened to the same music and spoke the same way as my classmates did, I could infiltrate those social circles and become so familiar to them that they would forget that they had called me Pooh-Face throughout my elementary school years. I knew that I could never actually be white, but I believed that I could still belong, that a lifetime of proximity to whiteness would allow a little of its gloss to rub off on me with its protective glaze. Rochelle was a revelation. Her hair was sculpted into long, thick purple braids that whipped around her head like ropes. She wore a big silver chain with a map of Africa dangling at the end of it, and a pair of headphones that hugged her neck like a second necklace and pumped hip-hop music into the air around her. She seemed to have stepped right out of a music video into the hallway of our school. I wished I could wear an outfit like that, but my mother posed a formidable obstacle. My mother, born in Barbados, which she called Little England, raised me according to the laws laid down by her own mother. And my Nana's most sacred belief was that the most important thing a woman could do in her life was be a lady. Being a lady meant carrying yourself with dignity and grace in the face of whatever trials and tribulations might assail you. A lady never lost her cool. She never swore. She never let anyone see her cry. She kept the things that bothered her to herself, be they a lack of money, menstrual cramps, or past trauma rearing its head. Every day, she covered her dining room table with a clean white tablecloth laid with gold-rimmed china. She used crystal drinking glasses for even a sip of water, wore a slip under her dresses and skirts without fail, and made sure that no one, even the mailman, ever saw her hair uncombed. I put my mother out of my mind when I approached Rochelle after class on that first day of school. She was standing by her locker, openly reaching into her t-shirt to adjust her bra, her headphones emanating at throbbing, dangerous speed. "Hi," I ventured, dipping my toe into the lake before plunging in. "Yo, sister!" She stopped fiddling with her undergarments and turned to face me. It was hard to discern her expression due to the fact that she was wearing sunglasses with saucer-sized lenses, even though we were indoors. "I was waiting for you to check me out." "I'm Chastity." I extended my hand as I'd been taught. "Nice to meet you." "I'm Rochelle. And what the fuck are you giving me your hand for? Do I look like some kind of business guy doing a deal or whatever shit they do?" I snatched my hand back. She surveyed my clothes. "You do know you Black, right? Because your clothes look like what them Sweet Valley High bitches wear." The water lapped icily at my ankles as I looked down at my plaid shirt, waffle print t-shirt, and dark skinny jeans. "You adopted?" she asked next. "Me? No," I said. "Why?" "Why? Because just about everyone else in this place is white." She swept an arm around at the stability of the hallways, their bleached walls and floors and gleaming gray lockers. "So I thought maybe you live with white folks and you don't look like you got taken into care by them fucking people, which means you're adopted." "Nope, I live with my folks, Black folk." "You're shitting me." She whipped the sunglasses off her face to stare at me. She had lovely eyes, a surprising light brown glinting with orange, framed by long, thick, dark lashes. "For real?" "Yep. My mom's from Barbados and my dad's from Turks and Caicos." "No fucking way. My mom's from Barbados too. Hey, maybe we're related. Everyone fucks everyone on that fucking island." In her ladylike way, my mother had often said the same thing. "A lot of people in Barbados are kin, but don't realize it because some of our men are rather promiscuous," she would proclaim with disdain. "You're better off marrying someone who isn't from Barbados." I had no intention of marrying anyone from anywhere in the Caribbean. In fact, I wasn't interested in Black men at all until Rochelle came along. Rochelle asked, "So where do y'all live?" "On Crescent Street." "You?" "I think it's called Castle Street or some shit like that, wherever those fucking people live." "That's a block away from me," I said. I was still unsure about the reference to those fucking people, but sensed it wasn't the time to ask. "You going home now?" "Yeah." I was supposed to meet Sadie, Jen, and Alice, who had been my friends since kindergarten. We always walked to and from school together. But the thought of another walk filled with their inane chatter about their hockey academy, grunge bands, and our science homework was dwarfed by the intoxicating possibility of spending more time in the company of this perfect creature.
Our next speaker is Lisa Kai from Toronto. She graduated from Western University with a Master of Library and Information Science and works in IT. She has been published in The Dark, Polar Borealis, The Future Fire, and elsewhere. She volunteers for NaNoWriMo and is a submissions editor for Speculative North magazine, and she here she is online.
Yes,
Let me
hello,
just make sure
thank
we
you.
can hear you, Lisa. Can you say something?
Yes, testing, can you hear me?
Oh, wait, just 1 minute.
I
Okay.
think I have to turn this up.
Let's see. I'm just gonna double check. Where is the sound settings?
We've done this before. everybody.
We
It
did
will
do
work.
this. It's not bad. Let's just say not
Yeah.
speakers.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you say hello?
Hello, testing?
I think that we can hear you.
Yeah, does it go louder?
It's not going here. I don't know where it's coming out of. I turned on my headphones and then kind of messed up. It's the Zoom settings, I'm sorry. Can I say hi again? Can you say hi again?
Hello?
Okay, let's,
Is it coming out of your computer?
I think external headphones is what it's saying.
Hello?
Yep, we got it.
We're good? All right, great. All right, hello, everyone.
Perfect,
It's
thank you.
nice to meet you all virtually. And thank you also to Brockton for inviting me. This is my first ever reading as a writer, so that's fun. I'm gonna be reading a short story. It's a very short story. It's called Spotted All Over with Magenta. This was published in an online magazine called A Coup of Owls back in their spring 2023 issue. And it's basically a narration. My main character is narrating how she managed to create a pair of wedding gowns for her and her future bride. In terms of how I've structured this, I've written out 6 scenes in my story, so there's going to be times where I'm going to utter a number. So just so you're aware, that means it's a scene, it's a new scene that's happening. For the occasion, I have a wisteria background because that's going to be relevant later on. I've also got like a floral themed shirt that I'm wearing tonight. All right, so I'm gonna go get started and read it out. Spotted all over with magenta. I've returned with our wedding dresses. You waited atop a mountainous valley, watching the sun, shadows, and moons cycle back and forth hundreds of times for me to complete the construction of worthy garments. Before we don these dresses and call upon our friends and family to witness our union, let me tell you all the ways I love you. 1. On our gowns' right sleeve, orchids are bent towards the grass, like little red dragons. Their petal wings stuck out straight in mid-flight. The day I departed from you and our valley, I saw a dragon silhouetted against the sun. Their wide wings spread out and shaded the land beneath us. Imagine being so big and strong. Your very presence overshadows the sun. The first time we met, dancing around a bonfire, you mistook me for such a creature, disguised in human form. As the flames danced, on my dark hair and skirts. That was my sign to take flight. I rode every breeze under the skies to collect this orchid's tiny seeds. I clasped them in my palms and planted them in a tree's crevice. As they grew out of the dark bark, I called to the bees. They buzzed far and wide, following the orchid's scent. They shrouded the tree for weeks, waiting to take that pollen to their hives. Now, the tree is covered from trunk to branches to twigs in thousands of small scarlet dragons ready to dive down. One day, I'll take you there to see the ruby tree surrounded by a forest of green. 2. On the left sleeves, blossoms greet you with 7 petals. They're dyed in splotches of purple on yellow. Lean close to see the universes these flowers hide. Tucked in the dark spots, white celestial bodies glitter in greeting. The stars consume their planets in pale light, collide with each other, burst, and separate again and again. Their kind sprout once every few years in a fairy queen's orchard. The trees bear sparkling dark fruit only Her Majesty samples. I hid in thorny bushes and frozen ponds for months as I observed knights patrolling the grounds, their sharp blades and arrows ready to take down any trespassers. In the evening, I made my move. I hovered above the land. The branches and blossoms glowed mauve. Their season of life was supposed to be serene, confined, and obedient to the whims of royalty. When we were little, we had watched this spectacle from afar on a hill and dreamed of what was hidden in those clouds of light. We were allowed to imagine, but never dared to discover the truth. I fired a great gust that stole the brightness away. Flowers were swept up in a whirl of my wind, and the branches plucked bare. I left that land, twirling in the heart of a hurricane of shivering petals. If I hadn't gotten enough for us, I would have done this again and blown away every guard to the corners of the world. 3. The busts and skirts are embroidered with blue bell-shaped blooms. Among rows of spiky bushes in a desert, a single stalk arises within each of them, from which the bluebells sprout. By night, moths roll balls of pollen all over themselves. Wherever they fly, puffs of gold sprinkle behind them. They go bush to bush, laying eggs in suitable flora. Their offspring hatch in a bed of creamy pollen, embraced by curvy blue petals. That small world is all they know at birth. If we have children, let's build a bed as soft and colorful as a caterpillar's. As the bluebells bloom, farmers pluck them for sweet perfume. They have an arrangement with the bugs to leave nested flowers untouched in exchange for efficient pollination. I promised a good year of weather for a barrel of bellflowers, and the insects and humans slept well, knowing nothing in their lives would be disturbed. Some storm gods may be discontented about overstepped territories, but I'm willing to take blizzards and lightning bolts for you. 4. Do you think I'm finished? Do you think this dress is enough for you? Atop our heads we'll wear crowns. Before I trekked back to you, I rested in a port city. A ragged girl sold boxes of flowers by the docks. She sat at her spot for days, awaiting customers. She resembled me when I was young. I too did everything I needed to survive. I bought all her goods and made a wreath whenever I wasn't sewing on ships and trains. Your crown has wide white flowers, their pointed tips spotted all over with magenta. In the center is a yellow stigma. They're just like your eyes. I was born under an ancient wisteria tree. The tendrils, with their little purple blooms, inched closer and closer as my mother labored. When I entered this world, the land burst with lilac petals. That tree couldn't withhold its excitement. It was my first friend. When I practiced with my wind powers, it always flailed its branches and rained flowers, pretending I had hit it with a great gust. I was an illegitimate child of a goddess and a human man. I had nothing to inherit except my magic. When I visited my mother under this tree, she sat against the trunk. She left me to fend for myself, yet I wanted to let her know about you and what I was collecting. She yanked a violet tendril above her and whipped about in the wind. I wrapped it into a wreath for my head. Though the tree cannot make it to my wedding, its blossoms can. 5. Now, my dear, when do you want to dress up? Be careful when deciding a date. With every passing day, the flora of these garments shall wilt, and petals will flow down and form a circle around our dresses. What drinks and desserts should be served at our wedding? Shall I go on about my adventures? In the end, my every answer leads back to you. And that is the whole story. Thank you, everyone.
All right. We do only, this is, next up is going to be our last reader. If you are familiar with Brockton, you know, we usually have 4. And if you saw our initial announcement, you know that we were supposed to have Hannah Mary McKinnon. She had a personal emergency. She will be back in July of 2024. So if you want to come and see her, get some thriller, that's when she'll be back. Up next is something I'm super excited about. I don't know if you're my friend on Facebook, you saw me post about how 1 year I did a James Walk of Toronto. If you're familiar with James Walks, and it was like a science fiction and fantasy James Walk where we went around with my partner and pointed out like all the places in Toronto that have featured in science fiction and fantasy books and novels. And David Nicol was somebody we talked about specifically, we started out at Nathan Phillips Square, and he's got a great story about like fighting happening under City Hall that may or may not be about our previous mayor, Rob Ford. He also has a story about like 10 caterpillars that really freaks me out because I grew up in Northern Ontario and experienced many really horrific experiences with 10 caterpillars when I was a kid. There in the 92 or 93 or something, we had like these big waves. So those are short stories. He also has novels. He'll tell you. I'm going to read his actual bio now. You don't need to sit around. David Nicol is an award-winning author of horror and speculative fiction. His most recent novel is Volk, a novel of radiant abomination, completing the book of the duology that began with Utopia, a novel of terrible optimism. David.
Well, this is really nice. This is, it's very nice to be here. This is actually the first time I've done a public reading since the pandemic. The last public reading that I did prior to the pandemic was in 2019 when this book came out, which itself is a 10-year anniversary of my first collection, Monstrous Affections. I've done pictures in it. It's got new introductions. And I read a very old story in Windsor that actually kicks this off. I'm going to do the same thing here because I will not lie, it has been a quiet pandemic for publication. So, This story is the Sloan Man. I'm not going to read all of it because it'll take us late, but I will tell you that you can buy this here, or you can just go online on my website because this I have put up in its entirety. So this is a little bit of the Sloan Man. Mrs. Sloan had only 3 fingers on her left hand, but when she drummed them against the countertop, the tiny polished bones at the end of the 4th and 5th stump clattered like fingernails. If Judith hadn't been looking, she wouldn't have noticed anything strange about Mrs. Sloan's hand. Tell me how you met Herman, said Mrs. Sloan. She turned away from Judith as she spoke to look out the window, the kitchen window, where Herman and his father were getting into Mr. Sloan's black pickup truck. Seeing Herman and Mr. Sloan together was a welcome distraction for Judith. She was afraid that Herman's stepmother would catch her staring at that hand. Judith didn't know how she would explain that with any grace. Things are off to a bad enough start as it is. Outside, Herman wiped his sleeve across his pale, hairless scalp and, seeing Judith watching from the window, turned the gesture into an exaggerated way. He grinned wetly through the late afternoon sun. Judith felt a little grin of her own growing and waved back, fingers waggling an infantile bye-bye. Hurry home, she mouthed through the glass. Herman stared back blandly, not understanding. Did you meet him at school? Judith flinched. The drumming had stopped, and when she looked, Mrs. Sloan was leaning against the counter with her mutilated hand hidden in the crook of crossed arms. Judith hadn't even seen the woman move. No, Judith finally answered. Herman doesn't go to school. Neither do I. Mrs. Sloan smiled. She had obviously been a beautiful woman in her youth, and in most ways she still was. Mrs. Sloan's hair was overhung, and it played over her eyes mysteriously like a movie star's. She had cheekbones that Judith's ex-boss Talia would have called sculpted, and the only signs of her age were the tiny crow's feet of her eyes and the harsh little lines at the corners of her mouth. I didn't mean to imply anything, said Mrs. Sloan. Sometimes he goes to school, sometimes museums, sometimes just shopping plazas. That's Herman. Judith expected Mrs. Sloan's smile to turn into a laugh, underscoring the low mockery she had directed towards Herman since he and Judith had arrived that morning. But the woman kept quiet, and the smile dissolved over her straight white teeth. She regarded Judith thoughtfully. Thought it might be school because you don't seem that old, said Mrs. Sloan. Of course, I don't usually have an opportunity to meet Herman's lady friends, so I suppose I can't really say. I met Herman on a tour. I was on vacation in Portugal. I went there with a girl I used to work with, and when we were in Lisbon, Herman appeared on the same tour as you. Did your girlfriend join you on that outing, or were you alone? Stacy got food poisoning. This was about the same. It was a rotten day, humid and muggy. Judith wanted to tell the story short, but she told it to her own family and friends countless times. It had its own rhythm. Her fateful meeting with Herman Sloan in the roped-off scriptorium of the monastery outside Lisbon, dinner that night in a vast, empty restaurant deserted in the off-season. In the face of Mrs. Sloan, though, the rhythm of the telling was somehow lost. So Judith told it as best she could. And so we kept in touch, she finally finished lamely. Mrs. Sloan nodded slowly and didn't say anything for a moment. Try as she might, Judith couldn't read the woman, and she had always prided herself on being able to see through most people at least halfway. But she couldn't see that this person at all was particularly irksome because of who she was, a potential in-law, for God's sake. Judith's mother had advised her, look at the parents if you want to see what kind of man the love of your life will be in 30 years. See if you can still love them with all their faults, all their habits, because that's how things will be. Judith realized again that she wanted very much for things to be just fine with her 30 years down the line. But if this afternoon were any indication, Herman had been uneasy about the two of them going to Fenland to meet his parents at all. But as Judith explained, it was a necessary step. She knew it even if Herman didn't. As soon as they turned off the highway, he shut his eyes and wouldn't open them until Judith pulled into the driveway. Mrs. Sloan met them, and Herman seemed to relax then, opening his eyes and blinking in the sunlight. Judith relaxed too, seeing the two of them together. They were definitely father and son, sharing features and mannerisms like images in a mirror. Mr. Sloan took Judith up in a big damp hug the moment she stepped out of the car. The gesture surprised her at first, and she tried to pull away, but Mr. Sloan's unstoppable grin had finally put her at ease. "You are very lovely," said Mrs. Sloan finally. "It's to be expected, though. Tell me what you do for a living. Are you still working now that you've met Herman?" Judith wanted to snap something clever at the presumption, but she stopped herself. "I'm working. Not at the same job, but in another salon. I do people's hair and I'm learning manicure." Mrs. Sloan seemed surprised. "Really? I'm impressed." Now Judith was sure Mrs. Sloan was making fun, and a sluice of anger passed too close to the surface. "I work hard," she said hotly. "It may not seem..." Mrs. Sloan silenced her with shushing motions. "Don't take it the wrong way," she said. "It's only that when I met Herman's father, I think I stopped working the very next day." Those must have been different times. They weren't that different. Mrs. Sloan's smile was narrow and ugly. Perhaps Herman's father just needed different things. "Well, I'm still working." "So you say." Mrs. Sloan got up from the kitchen stool. "Come to the living room, dear. I have something to show you." The shift in tone was too sudden, and it took Judith a second to realize that she'd even been bidden. Mrs. Sloan half turned at the kitchen door and beckoned with her 5-fingered hand. "Judith," she said, "you've come this far already. Might as well finish the journey." The living room was distastefully bare. The walls needed paint, and there was a large brown stain on the carpet that Mrs. Sloan hadn't even bothered to cover up. She sat down on the sofa and Judith joined her. "I wanted you to see the family album. I think..." Mrs. Sloan reached under the coffee table and lifted out a heavy black-bound volume. "I don't know, but I hope you'll find this interesting." Mrs. Sloan's face lost some of its hardness as she spoke. She finished with a faltering smile. "I'm sure I will," said Judith. This was a good development, more like what she had hoped the visit would become. Family albums and welcoming hugs and funny stories about what Herman was like when he was 2. She snuggled back against the tattered cushions and looked down at the album. This must go back generations. Mrs. Sloan still hadn't opened it. "Not really," she said. "As far as I know, the Sloans never mastered photography on their own. All of the pictures in here are mine." "May I?" Judith put out her hands, and with a shrug, Mrs. Sloan handed the album over. "I should warn you," began Mrs. Sloan. Judith barely listened. She opened the album to the first page, and she shut it almost as quickly. She felt her face flush with shock and anger. She looked at Mrs. Sloan, expecting to see that cruel, nasty smile back again. But Mrs. Sloan wasn't smiling. "I was about to say," said Mrs. Sloan, reaching over and taking the album back, "that I should warn you, this is not an ordinary family album." Judith couldn't form a sentence. She was so angry. No wonder Herman hadn't wanted her to meet his family. "I took that photograph almost a year after I cut off my fingers," said Mrs. Sloan. "Photography became a small rebellion for me, not nearly so visible as a mutilation. Herman's father still doesn't know about it, even though I keep the book up here in full view. Sloan men don't open books much. But we do, don't we, Judith?" Mrs. Sloan opened the album again and pointed at the Polaroid on the first page. Judith wanted to look away, but found that she couldn't. "Herman's father brought the 3 of them home early before I had woken up. I don't know where he found them. Maybe he just called and they were the ones who answered. They were 3 women. The oldest couldn't have been more than 25. Mrs. Sloan had caught them naked and asleep along with what looked like Herman's father. One woman had her head cradled near Mr. Sloan's groin. Another was cuddled in the white folds of his armpit, her wet hair fanning like seaweed across his shoulders. The third lay curled in a fetal position off his wide flank. Something dark was smeared across her face. And no, they weren't prostitutes," said Mrs. Sloan. "I had the occasion to talk to one of them on her way out. She was a newlywed. She and her husband had come up for a weekend at the family cottage. She was, she supposed, going back." "That's sick," gasped Judith, and she meant it. She really felt ill. "Why would you even take something like that?" "Because," replied Mrs. Sloan, her voice growing sharp again, "I found that I could. Mr. Sloan was distracted, as you can see, and at that instant I found some of the will that he had kept from me since we met." "Sick," Judith whispered. Herman was right, we shouldn't have come. When Mrs. Sloan closed the album this time, she put it back underneath the coffee table. She patted Judith's arm with her mutilated hand and smiled. No, no, dear, I'm happy you're here. Happier than you can know. Judith wanted nothing more at that moment than to get up, grab her suitcase, throw it in the car and leave. But of course she couldn't. Herman wasn't back yet and she couldn't think of leaving without him. If Herman's father was doing all of these things, why didn't you just divorce him? If that photograph offends you, why don't you just get up and leave right now? Herman wouldn't like it, Mrs. Sloan finished for her. That's it, isn't it? Judith nodded. He's got you too, continued Mrs. Sloan, just like his father got me. But maybe it's not too late for you. I love Herman. He never did anything like that. Of course you love him, and I love Mr. Sloan. Desperately, passionately, overall reason. The corner of Mrs. Sloan's mouth perked up in a small bitter grin. Would you like to hear how we met? Judith wasn't sure she would, but she nodded anyway. Sure. I was living in Toronto with a friend at the time. Had been for several years. As I recall, she was more than a friend. We were lovers. Mrs. Sloan paused, obviously waiting for a reaction. Judith sat mute, her expression purposefully blank. Mrs. Sloan went on. In our circle of friends, such relationships were quite fragile. Usually they would last no longer than a few weeks. It was, so far as we knew anyway, a minor miracle that we managed to stay together for as long as we had. Mrs. Sloan gave a bitter laugh. We were very proud. How did you meet Herman's father? On a train, she said quickly, a subway train. Didn't even speak to me. I just felt his touch. I began packing my things that night. I can't even remember what I told her. My friend. Can't have been like that. Judith started to get up, but Mrs. Sloan grabbed her, 2 fingers and a thumb, closing like a trap around her forearm. Judith fell back down on the sofa. Let go! Mrs. Sloan's held tight. With her other hand, she took hold of Judith's face and pulled it down to face her. Don't argue with me, she hissed, her eyes desperately intent. You're wasting time. They'll be back soon, and when they are, we won't be able to do anything. We'll be under their spell again. Something in her tone caught Judith, and instead of breaking away, of running to the car and waiting inside with the doors locked until Herman got back, instead of slapping Mrs. Sloan, as she was having planned to do, Judith sat still. Tell me what you mean, she said slowly and deliberately. Mrs. Sloan let go, and Judith watched as relief flooded across her features. We'll have to open the album again, she said. That's the only way I can tell it. And that's all for now.
I remember that story. It gets worse. Don't sit down. This is actually when we ask all of the writers if Zilla and David can come back up. We can get some chairs. If Lisa is Lisa, yeah, and we're gonna do the Q&A.
Okay. Lisa, you're going to be up on the screen as well.
Yep, sounds good.
And we can hear you. Perfect. That's great.
All right. Do you have any questions from the audience or online?
I had a question earlier from Alex, which we did not get to. That's the only one I have.
Okay, well, we can ask Alex a question. I mean, we have questions, Pete. Don't worry.
Okay. I will ask all the questions. Where did it go? Yeah, there we go. So Leanne asks for Alex, any suggestions on how to create a safe space for people such as those experiencing homelessness or trauma? People who are often afraid might feel more compelled to share their stories.
Sorry, can you just repeat that? Might feel compelled.
To share their stories.
Might not feel compelled? Sorry.
So how do you create a space where they feel they can feel compelled?
They do feel compelled. Okay, so, yeah, so should I just stay off screen over here or whatever? Oh, okay. So, hi again. That's a great question. So part of what's wonderful about this method, the AWA method, is that the structure that's set up really does lend itself to creating a safer space for homeless. I've actually done workshops for women experiencing homelessness and addiction, and done, like I mentioned, for people who are trauma survivors, for women who are trauma survivors. So I think just the confidentiality, and there's no pressure to share, so people can write and not share. And there's no, in these workshops, there's no criticism of people's language or voice or grammar or anything like that. So those are some of the things. And also talking about the work as fiction. And yeah, and the free writing, which I kind of mentioned right as we were starting to write, but the practice is to during those however many minutes, it's maybe up to 20 minutes sometimes. Usually 2 minutes is a bit short, but people are encouraged to just keep their pen moving or pencil moving or keep their fingers tapping, and to try not to let that editor, that critic come out, and just write. And I think what I've noticed is that people often, yeah, do want to share their stories, and the facilitator holds space to ensure that all of the feedback is about what's strong in the piece. So it can take a while for people to warm up. Like I said, that trust can build over time. So I did want to say, can I address one of the other questions from earlier from Lisa? One more thing about if there's a problematic voice or in a group, another thing you can do is pull them aside on their, alone, because it can be a bit shaming to, it can be a little passive aggressive to call it out, if it's, although it can also be useful. Like I mentioned, if it was a racist comment or something, or a racist voice. So it's also so you could do to pull someone aside to talk to them outside of that moment. But it's really important to make sure the workshop participants as a whole feel safer. Can't always feel safe in this world, but okay. Yeah, thanks.
All right, so for the readers, one of the things that occurred to me is that, so also in our mandate, so we have a very broad definition of diversity in our mandate, and it includes programming, established authors and emerging authors together in the same event. And I think today we have this great range of David has multiple books, Stella has 2 books coming out and prizes. And as Lisa said, this was her first reading. So what this makes me think of is but we know that these are very superficial ideas of what success means and what is established and who is a writer, which Alex also touched on, because if you're a writer, then if you write, you're a writer, right? So I'm wondering, what to you is a measure of success? What do you celebrate? Because it's also a slog, right? You can work on a novel for 10 years. And you need to celebrate yourself somehow. You need to give yourself some gratification during that whole process. So what to you is a measure of success? What do you celebrate as a milestone, as an accomplishment?
Okay, yeah, I think it's tricky because there are measures of success that writers can have for themselves. All of those measures are bad for writers. It's a terrible idea to measure your success. There are moments where you feel as though this is why I'm doing this, and it's, for me, it is when I reach a reader. It is when, and this is probably also terrible for writers, but if somebody online says honestly about how something that I've written has impacted them, that really feels good. It's not because the work is good, but because the act of what I've been trying to do, which is communicate to people, tell people a story, engage people in the bullshit that is my lying imagination, that hopefully does some good and brings some joy. I think that's the important measure of success. And then we all destroy ourselves by regularly using all the other ones. Just because it's unhealthy doesn't mean we don't do it.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite quotes is from Zadie Smith, who's one of my favorite writers, and she says, "I've never confused honors with achievement." And I think that that's a really good way to look at it. I have been fortunate to win a lot of awards. Sure, I like that. There's different reasons I like it. You get money, you get recognition. It helped me get an agent, it helped me get a publisher. So obviously, I'm not going to say that I'm not grateful and appreciative of the writers' trust and people like that that put that faith in me as a writer. But I think that is what's more important, is that people read my work and were touched and moved by my work and chose to give me something as a result of that. So it's not the end result, it's the process of getting there. And I think as a writer, obviously we want to be read, right? Like that is your success, be read or heard if you're reading aloud today. And people here, people online, people at other events that have read your work and then are moved by it. Like probably the most exciting thing that happened to me was the first time a person I didn't know came up to me at a gathering and said, "I read this story of yours online, it made me cry." And it wasn't like a family member saying that because they have to, or friends saying that. It was someone that worked with my husband, that like we're not friends with her. And she had just seen on social media something, I had this story, and she found it and she read it. It was something that won some prize or other. But she didn't care about that. She didn't know what the prize was, but she cared that it made her cry. And I think just being able to write something that, you know, we've all read those books that move us. And I've always been like, I want to do for other people what these writers have done for me, right? Like what Zadie Smith has done for me, what Toni Morrison has done for me, what James Baldwin has done for me. I want to be that for somebody because they aren't around anymore. Well, Zadie is, but the two are. And, you know, like different generations of different ages and different places need different voices. So just being able to be that for your community, I think is really important.
Lisa?
Yeah, I think the others have covered it pretty well. Like success to me is however you define it. Like if success for you is just like writing something and then you finish it and then you put in your Google Drive and no one ever sees it again, if that is what makes you content, then that's as perfectly valid as, say, like getting something traditionally published and having it appear on the New York bestseller. I think the great thing about writing is that you can do whatever you want to do with it and like set whatever goal you have for yourself. Like you can't really be like, you can't see yourself as a total like loser or a winner. It's more about like you have a story to tell and you want to get it out there. And I think that's like the most important thing in terms of what you think success is. So for me, like a big measure of success is just finishing something, because it's so hard to like to just imagine something. Yeah, it's hard to like have the idea and then have like your plot or whatever, and then finally putting it into words and then writing it on a page and then completing it and then like editing and making sure it makes sense so that other people can read it and understand what you were getting to it. So yeah, to me, success is just like hitting that finish line, and it doesn't matter if it's like publishable or not. It's just finishing the story is the most important part, at least to me.
Thank you so much. That's great. Just checking in that there is no other questions from here. Yeah.
This is a question for Zilla. I'm not sure quite how to, So all of your pieces were wonderful. The one with Rochelle really struck me. And I'm just wondering because, so I just had in my MFA program a class on writing the decolonial fiction class, which was great. It was just the first workshop today. And I'm just wondering, do you approach, like, I'm just curious how you approached that story. Like we kind of thinking like, this is, definitely dealing with colonialism here. Yeah, because it was so well crafted. So I'd just love to hear a little bit about that.
Thank you. I mean, everything I write, I try to decolonize. Like that's kind of like everything I do, I try to decolonize. So that's kind of been like my mission for myself, even before I called it that. Just growing up in a home where my parents come from a colonial background, and we don't talk about that enough, right? Like we know a lot about residential schools, which is good. We should know about that. That's what happened here in this country, and that's a horrible tragedy, but the same things happen in so many other countries. Where people come here to live, but it wasn't done directly by Canada, it was done by Britain or France or Spain or the other nations of Europe, and did the same things. And that does not really get talked about. And that continued into the lives of my parents. It's not a long time ago thing. So when I kind of started realizing like the kind of trauma that that did to them and that then affected how I grew up and was raised, a big part of why I think always wrote was to kind of get beyond that and to kind of understand it and untangle it and hopefully find a way through it. So definitely with that story, like the title is Lady. And if you read my blog post for this, like I talked about that in there as well, where that theme of be a lady was something that my grandmother and my mom said a lot. And it's interesting, right? Because a lady is a noble person, so it's the wife of a lord, right? So if you get knighted, your wife becomes lady whoever. It also sometimes is used instead of woman, but Black women were not supposed to be ladies. So for her, although now when you look at all the kind of pieces of being a lady, it seems oppressive. For my grandmother, that was a way of asserting her humanity and her dignity. Her grandmother was a slave. She was an enslaved woman. So she was only 2 generations into freedom. And she didn't get to be educated. She had to serve other people. She had to work for other people. She couldn't bring her needs forward. And so being a lady was kind of at that time revolutionary. But it becomes oppressive because if you don't take the next step forward into freedom, then you get stuck in like that generation from the past. So what I was trying to show with the lady story was that you can be a quote lady without following necessarily those rules. So at the end, I say Rochelle was a lady because it's showing how Rochelle has a colonial background as well, but hers is a little bit different because she's a victim of sexual abuse. And so that has a lot to do with who she is as a person and how she reacts to the world. And Chastity, the one who becomes her friend, doesn't understand that until very near the end. And then she realizes that although her mother looks at somebody like Rochelle as vulgar and unladylike and unsuitable and like don't be friends with her, we're all going to the same place. So they're all Black women, they all have the same trauma, and they're just coming at it from different angles and different directions. So that was kind of what I was trying to show, was that sometimes we have this kind of class divide within our community. And it was really exemplified by my grandparents, because while my grandmother was all about being a lady, fitting in, my grandfather was fighting the power. He was getting thrown in jail because he was speaking against the king and the queen. He refused to go to war. The police were chasing him, he was hiding. So my mom really had kind of like these tensions of like, okay, do you fight and be a rebel or do you get along? And at the end of the day, it's a losing game, whichever one you choose, because colonialism is the problem, right? So all of that was kind of there, but then I was just like, I'm gonna make 2 characters and one's gonna have one side of the picture and the other's gonna have the other side. And they're going to be friends to show that they can come together. So that was kind of, I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, but I mean, that's very much, all my writing will probably see that theme come back because it's what I think about like every day.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, you can keep that because I'm gonna ask one final question, unless anybody has another one. Okay, so we always like to end with this one question, which is book recommendation. Can you tell us one book that you've read somewhat recently that you would like, that you think other people should read? Not your own books, because we already want to read all your own books. But a book, I mean, you just mentioned Zadie Smith, so.
Yeah, I mean, Zadie Smith, actually the book that I read this year that's probably like still like blowing my mind the most is Celeste Ng, Everything I Never Told You. I don't know if anybody's read that book, but that book blew my mind. It's about a girl who goes missing and ends up murdered. They tell you that right in the beginning, so that's not a spoiler. And then it kind of goes back through like how, again, the family trauma that got her to that point. So she is the daughter of a Chinese American man and a white American woman in the 70s. So the parents get together in like the 50s. Very taboo at that time, illegal to be in an interracial marriage in a lot of states. And both of them have their own reasons for getting in a relationship. So the mother wants to be with the Chinese man because she thinks that he's different like her, because she's a very smart and educated woman in a man's world. She's kind of really feminist, so she's like, he's different like me. He wants to be with her because she fits in and she's American like everyone else, and she's pretty and blonde and is everything he can't have. And how does that trauma impact their teenage daughter and their other kids? And it's so beautifully written. It's kind of an omniscient voice. It's not a very long book, so it's like a quick read, but it's just so beautiful, the prose and just kind of how it gets into the lives of these characters, and I just loved it so much. So I would definitely recommend that. But yes, also Zadie Smith. She's a new one, The Fraud. I haven't read it yet. Looks like it's going to be amazing. But my favorite of hers is On Beauty.
Okay, well, there are a couple I will recommend. One for a reason that you might not think, which is Dracula. This year, I actually sat down with Dracula and read the whole thing, a confession. For many years, I would get most of the way through Dracula, and then the part in the middle where everybody tells each other what amazing people they are for most of the book, I'd stopped. But this time I plowed on through, and what is interesting about it is what an interesting window it is to different storytelling conventions over the years. There are things that Bram Stoker does in Dracula that would never pass muster in modern publishing. The aforementioned fact that Dracula never shows up, except for one part at the end, looked at through a pair of binoculars, I think, while people are killing him. But it tells us that, and I think to Alex's point, that storytelling is, we think of it as having these immutable rules, but they change. And it, as a writer, can give one some freedom to realize that things that you might not be able to access yourself are in fact powerful enough to inform a genre, to inform nightmares, to make some amazing movies that leave out all the parts about telling each other how amazing they are. The other thing that I would recommend is which I'm in the middle of reading right now, Stephen Millhauser's latest story collection, Distractions. Millhauser is a treasure. He has come up with wonderful, fabulous stories that have influenced my own writing in so many ways. His latest collection is a collection of these stories which he still publishes in little magazines about small towns and dreams that transcend the mundane reality. He's a beautiful writer, and I recommend that and everything else that he's written.
Great, I've taken note of that. Lisa?
Yeah, I've got two. I read R.F. Kuang's Babel, and it's quite a complex story. It's about it's set in our world, but there's various like magic systems going on regarding like using silver, and like you can do magic things with it. And in Oxford, out in the UK, there are these various translators of a variety of languages. They're gathered, they're studying together, and they're working under the British Empire. And it's like their intention is to help the British Empire get more powerful and concentrate like silver and also languages. And it's a very intricate critique of like colonization, capitalism, and also resistance as well, because this isn't really a spoiler because it's in the title somewhere, where the translators are trying to resist what's going on. They're trying to fight back against the colonial powers. So there's a lot going on. It's pretty unconventional because I think there were some like footnotes here and there, so you can tell that the author really did her research on that. The other book I can think of is Frying Plantain. What I really like about that one is, well, it's about a teenage girl, and the story is about her growing up from about like early teens up to around when she's about 18, 19, ready to go off to university. And it's about a lot of her childhood, the things that she has to deal with, like friends or family drama and trying to navigate her life. It's set in Toronto and is coincidentally in the area where I grew up. So it was a neat little thing where she mentions various intersections or stores or schools. And it's like, oh, I've walked there. I know exactly what that area looks like because I've been to that school. So that's like if you want some local Toronto fiction, I recommend that.
Can you say again the middle, the first one you talked? Sorry, I was trying to get my phone to write down Millhauser instead of Milwaukee. What was the name of the first one that you said?
Yeah, the first one was Babel by R.F. Kuang. The actual title is really long. It's something like Babel or an arcane history or something about some.
Just the author name.
Yeah.
And the second one too, actually, I didn't hear that one either. Can you ask?
Frying Plantain is the name of it. Yeah. All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. David has books for sale. I don't know if you have books for sale with you. Okay. But all the books can be ordered online. So I'm pretty sure all books can be ordered online. Not from Amazon if you can help it. But I mean, if that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do, right? Thank you all for being here tonight. We will be back in November, and our lineup then is Paola. Oh man, I didn't get a chance to do like a pronunciation check with these people because we haven't actually talked to them yet. Paola Ferrante, Jeffrey Luscombe, David Demchek, and Shalene Knight. So it's an awesome lineup. Do we know who's the guest speakers? Not yet. Okay. So yeah, come back and see us on November 8th, 2023. Same bat time, same bat place.
I'm gonna take you off the screen. I will take you off the screen and put you back onto my screen. Where I was